Lou? Where's
Mr.
that White
President.
House intern? He's never here. I don't know what's going on. I guess we got it back on. You there, Ray?
Yes, Mr.
Yeah,
President.
so much
I'm
for
sorry for the
technology.
interruption. We were beginning to talk about Ukraine, and I think that it's really important for you to know what Putin said just yesterday. He was leaving Tashkent after a 2-day visit there. Tashkent being part of, the capital of Uzbekistan, 37 million people, one of the larger republics that scattered off from the Soviet Union back in the 1990s or so. Now, what I'd like to say is that he was asked about these challenges from none other than Secretary General Stoltenberg from NATO, saying the NATO countries should have the purview of using the missiles that are given to them, such as they are the British Storm Shadow, the ATACMS from the U.S., any way they like, to include attacking targets within Russia proper. And so he was asked about this, and I don't want to misquote him, but this is what Putin said about Stoltenberg. Stoltenberg's been the Secretary General of NATO for at least 8 or 9, 10 years. So he's no dolt, but he says very strange things. And this is what Putin says in reaction. I'm not sure what the NATO Secretary General is talking about. Using missiles to attack Russia? NATO missiles? He says, I've dealt with him as Prime Minister of Norway, and we generally had pretty good discussions on other issues. So I'm positive that he was not suffering from dementia back then. He should be aware of the fact that long-range precision weapons cannot be used without space-based reconnaissance. That is the most essential point. Now, Putin goes on to say, look, a lot of these weapons, including the ATACMS from the U.S., cannot be used without direct info from satellites flying around. And the only way that information gets to them is through the United States. So, in a word, anytime these things are used, they will be considered to be attacks by the UK or by the United States. And Russia has already officially threatened to retaliate against the UK, for example. What does it say? Oh, it says, if that happens, we feel free to attack any any UK military base and beyond. So not only in Ukraine, but beyond. They threaten the same kind of thing with respect to France putting in foot soldiers. So what we'd like to know, Mr. President, is that Putin has his own red line, if you will, and that is if these missiles, the French can go 155 miles, the ATACMS, I think, 200 miles. If they attack sensitive installations in Russia more than they already doing, well, that's a red line for Putin. And then what he said is, look, we know that cannot be done without support from NATO's surveillance, the satellites you have up there. So read the consequences. We will retaliate against Britain and Europe first, and maybe there's some solace in that. They have the means to attack Britain and France and even anybody else in Europe with hypersonic missiles that don't require a nuclear warhead. They can do just as much damage just as they are. So there's no real immediate fear of nuclear weapons usage, but there is some fear that when these missiles hit Russian targets, or when F-16s come in and try to fly out of bases to attack Russian targets, well, all's fair in love and war, says Putin. We know who directs that. We know where the satellite information comes from, who controls it, and we will react accordingly. He's never been so definitive in spelling out his knowledge, not only of what our allies are doing, but with the fact that we all know that they couldn't do it without U.S. technical surveillance and other technical help. So that it's getting a little bit more complicated than ever before in Ukraine. In his next sentence, he always says, "But I'm willing to negotiate. I'm willing to go back to where we were way back in April of 2022, just 6 weeks after the invasion of Ukraine." But nobody who we're going to talk to, because we do not consider that Zelensky is a legal representative of Ukraine because his term expired last week. So who are we going to talk to? I think the arm is out there to talk to somebody, not Zelensky, but I think the Russians are preparing to negotiate from a position of relative strength vis-a-vis what they had back in April of 2022. So we just want to make sure that you're aware of these latest descriptions of how the Russians read what we will be enabling if indeed those things strike in the heartland of Russia.
You know, Ray, I don't like to attribute to your advanced age now and some kind of becoming some kind of college hippie or peacenik or something. Remember that we used to have those people. But the fact of the matter is, we got a real problem there in the Ukraine. The war is not going well, and we can't reward aggression. And we made that very clear. And so, what your former colleague or friend from NATO is trying to say, we gotta be able to punch back. Now, I thought we had an answer with the, going after their ships, and that seemed to be doing a lot of damage. But you remember, we got into this thinking that the Russian military was the paper tiger, that they were going to collapse. And that was information that your agency seemed to back along with all the others. Now, suddenly I'm faced with not a collapsing Russia, and Putin being wiped off the stage of history, but his support there in Russia seems to be stronger than ever. He's into his new term. He runs off to China, and they got this, what do they call it? This love affair, this special relationship, this partnership without limits. I forget all the language, and meanwhile on the ground, it's not looking good for the free side of Ukraine, for the side we're back. And so you should be a little more sympathetic to why the head of NATO, who is charged with extending freedom, protecting it, is worried. And you're reading into this an unacceptable threat. But what else are we going to do now? What are we going to do? The Russians, is it not true that they're advancing? Is it not true that the freedom of the Ukrainians is at stake? What are you recommending here?
Well, Mr. President, you know that we intelligence folks are not supposed to be recommending anything.
Yeah, but you recommend it all the time. I've been around here not as long as you, but come on, it's always got. What would you do if you were president? Abandon the Ukrainians? Forget everything we said about preserving their freedom?
Mr. President, just between you and me, not in a professional way as an intelligence officer, I would recommend that you fire Lloyd Austin and his superior generals who told you what you wanted to hear when you should have been told the truth. The people in the bowels of the CIA from which I come knew quite well that Ukraine could not possibly win this war. As a matter of fact, the President of the United States, Mr. President, Obama, under whom you served as vice president, warned in 2015 the worst thing we could do for the Ukrainians would be for us to give them the idea that they could prevail militarily against a much more powerful Russia. Matter of fact, that's why we should never give them offensive weaponry. We should realize that Ukraine is a core interest of Russia, says Obama, it's not a core interest for us. We should be real careful about what wars we decide to wage. Okay, that's Obama. And just as a little hint here, there was a deputy secretary of state at the time who said exactly. It took it a couple of steps further. He says, "Look, if we give arms to Ukraine to fight against Russia, the Russians will match it. They'll double it. They'll triple it. They'll quadruple it." End quote. Now, who was that? That was Tony Blinken. That was Tony Blinken in 2015. Okay. I don't know. Maybe he thought that the geography changed, that the Russians lost their industrial capability, or maybe, I don't know what he thought, but he changed his mind. So, what I'm trying to tell you is that we don't have the capability within the CIA anymore to do military intelligence per se. Okay. We know what's going on, but we ceded that capability under Bobby Gates to the Pentagon. So the Pentagon is what tells not only the president, but also the Secretary of State and the head of the CIA what's going on in the battlefield. That's not the way it's supposed to be, Mr. President. We were supposed to be set up, the CIA, to tell you untainted intelligence. That was Truman's word, right? Untainted. That meant not any what he called departmental massaging. Okay, you're getting a lot of massaging by the State Department and by the NSC and by the and by
I'm gonna end this, Ray, but let me just say something. And I know you a long time, and your service to the country has been admirable, and you actually started out volunteering, right, for the armed forces, and then you went to the CIA and everything. And but listening to you, I don't know whether you're getting soft on this stuff, but I hear what you said. A lot of the analysts at the CIA, they even were against Vietnam and everything. So you never know. But I know you're not supposed to talk about politics, but you guys change governments all around the world. So you obviously know a lot about, right? You've overthrown a lot of governments around the world. You've picked leaders around the world. I don't know what your relation is to Zelensky and so forth, but I'm sure you had a hand in that. So don't give me, hold it, Ray. I am the president. Don't give me this lip about, you don't do politics. But, we've been doing this back and forth now for a number of years. So, Ray, and I go back a long way with you. I thought this election was going to be a piece of cake, or I wouldn't signed up for it again. I know I'm getting old. Okay, I know what it feels like. I'm, not as old as you, but I'm old. I got it. I thought it was going to be a piece of cake because I thought Trump was going to be just the Putin simp that we had got him cornered as, and that he's the guy who was weak on defense, And I thought that this war in the Ukraine was supposed to have a turning point, that by now the Ukrainians would be victorious and it would be Putin that would be begging for some kind of peace deal. And I certainly didn't expect this thing that's happening in Israel and everything, this disaster that makes Putin look good, in terms of oppressing your own people or people you've captured or what have you. So the real issue here is all I hear from you is somehow I should cut our losses in the Ukraine, and I should anger Putin and Netanyahu even more in Israel. You may not want to give political advice. What are you advising suicide? Is that your function? That's
Mr.
it.
President.
Political suicide. I'll just tell you right here. I get a little bit irritated. I'll see you next week. But, next time, really try to put yourself in my shoes and try to think, how do you help your country now when, we got some pretty big messes out there and we got to figure out how we, come out looking, at least responsible. All right?
Mr. President, may I have a last word here just to clarify something?
Keep it short.
Okay. There are two central intelligence agencies. I work for the folks who do the analysis. We know nothing. We know no more than a reader of the New York Times about governments being overthrown by people who work and live on the other side of those turnstiles at headquarters building. Okay, just to give you a short vignette from the past, before the Bay of Pigs, that terrible operation that John Kennedy was sucked into, before that happened, he was assured that Castro would fall as soon as somebody landed on the beach. Who told him that? The operations guys who were running the operation. What did the analysts tell him? Nothing. Why? Because they were cut out of it. Now, how do I know that? Arthur Schlesinger, a very famous historian who was working for John Kennedy for a couple of years in the beginning, wrote a book about it. And he said he found out that when they told him Castro's going to fall, it's just going to be fine, they never consulted with the Cuban experts on the analysis side. So what I'm saying to you, Mr. President, is that you got hundreds of people in the CIA, the other CIA in Kiev and elsewhere. They're going to tell you we're going to win. Of course we're going to win because we're involved. Okay. What I'm talking to are the analysts in our thing who said, when you said in July of last year that Putin has already lost, they said, what? So we know that you're getting bad advice. We're trying our best to we're going to try our best to tell it like it is. And we know that sometimes that is not appreciated, but thanks for your consideration and thanks for welcoming me back if you decide to do that.
Well, I'm going to let you back because, you need some of this. I hope it's not a reality check. I hope you're all wrong, but, I'll have to be honest with you, Ray. I never thought this Israel-Gaza, I thought it was cooled out. We're getting Israel together with Saudi Arabia, for God's sake, and so who cares about the Palestinians? Well, we have an agreement like we've had with Egypt forever, with Jordan, and so the last thing I thought was I'd be chopped at the knees by Netanyahu here. And then, we bought in that the war we're going to win. Ukraine's going to win. But try to look for some things that I actually can do the next time we talk, okay? Without, I might as well resign and forget about even competing in the election, see what maybe Kamala can do. All right. On that note, see you next week, Ray. Take care.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yeah.